Let's talk about something most people get wrong. When someone has a dismissive avoidant attachment style, the natural advice you hear everywhere is, just go no contact, walk away, cut them off, disappear. But here's the truth, no contact can actually be the worst thing you can do. Why? Because dismissive avoidants are wired to retreat when they feel pressured, smothered, or overwhelmed. They already see closeness as a threat to their independence. So, when you suddenly go no contact, you're not teaching them a lesson. You're confirming their deepest belief that intimacy is dangerous, that people will leave, and that they can only rely on themselves. Instead of pulling them closer, you're reinforcing the walls they already built around their heart. Now, I'm not saying you should chase, beg, or overgive. That will only push them further away, but a complete shut-down silence with no explanation creates a vacuum they're all too comfortable living in. Remember, dismissive avoidants have learned to survive in distance. They don't fear it the way you do. In fact, they often find comfort in it. So, no contact doesn't make them miss you. It makes them feel justified in their avoidance. It validates their story that closeness equals pain. What works instead? Controlled space, calm consistency, clear boundaries that protect your peace while still showing you're emotionally available without chasing. It's not about cutting them off, it's about showing them intimacy isn't suffocating and distance isn't the only safe option. That's how you shift the pattern. That's how you build trust with someone who's wired to run. So, before you rush into no contact, understand this. It might be the easy choice, but for a dismissive avoidant, it's not the healing one. No contact is often advised, but backfires with dismissive avoidance. At first, it sounds like strong advice. Cut them off, create silence, and make them realize your value. But when you're dealing with someone who is dismissive avoidant, the story is very different. They are already wired to see closeness as a threat. They have built their sense of safety on independence, on not needing anyone. When you suddenly go no contact, you're not making them chase you. You're confirming what they've believed all along. People will leave, and they cannot rely on anyone but themselves. This is why silence doesn't create longing for them the way it does for others. For many, absence makes the heart grow fonder, but for a dismissive avoidant, absence feels normal. Distance is where they feel safest. So instead of feeling your loss, they feel relief. Instead of missing your presence, they lean further into their self-reliance. No contact validates their walls and makes them trust even less in closeness. That's why it backfires, because it doesn't threaten their comfort zone, it reinforces it. And the more you retreat in total silence, the more they believe they were right to avoid intimacy in the first place. Now, that doesn't mean the answer is to chase or beg. Overgiving and overpursuing only create the opposite problem. It overwhelms them, confirms their fear of being smothered, and makes them withdraw even faster. The real shift happens in balance, controlled space instead of a total cut-off, calm consistency instead of dramatic silence. You create boundaries that protect your peace while showing emotional availability without pressure. This balance shows them something they rarely experience. It shows them that intimacy doesn't have to be suffocating. It shows them that closeness can exist without losing freedom. It teaches them that distance is not the only safe option. This is where trust begins to grow, not through vanishing acts, but through steady presence, not through punishing silence, but through calm energy that doesn't demand, doesn't overwhelm, but also doesn't abandon. That's how you slowly shift the pattern with someone who runs from closeness, by showing them that connection can feel safe and distance doesn't have to be their only refuge. Dismissive avoidants already equate closeness with loss of freedom. To them, intimacy often feels like a trap. When someone gets too close, their mind interprets it as pressure, as control, as a threat to their independence. Even simple gestures of love can be misread as demands. This comes from how they learned to survive emotionally. At some point, relying on others felt unsafe. Depending on people brought disappointment, rejection, or abandonment, so they built walls, creating distance as a way to feel secure. Closeness then became dangerous in their world. Instead of seeing it as comfort, they began to see it as risk, and every time someone tries to bridge that gap too quickly, their instincts tell them to pull back. It's not always because they don't care, it's because care feels heavy to them. Expressions of love and need from others can feel like chains rather than gifts. They crave connection deep down, but fear what it might cost them. That's why dismissive avoidants often push away the very intimacy they desire. They want love, yet they fear being swallowed by it. They want closeness, but on their terms, in ways that don't threaten their autonomy. So when a partner leans in, they lean back. When someone shows more emotion, they retreat into distance, and the cycle repeats itself, reinforcing their belief that closeness equals losing control. This pattern doesn't mean they are heartless or incapable of love. It simply means their nervous system is wired to protect them from what feels like a threat, and to them, too much closeness feels like losing the self. That's why pressure never works. That's why forcing intimacy only deepens their resistance. Because every time they feel cornered, their mind screams freedom, not connection. The tragedy is that the very thing that could heal them, real closeness, feels like the very thing that could break them. So they run, they withdraw, they shut down, not because they don't feel, but because feeling too much feels unsafe. The challenge is learning how to create connection without setting off that alarm inside them. To show that intimacy doesn't mean surrendering freedom, to prove that love can exist without taking away independence. Only then can they start to believe that closeness is not a prison, but a safe place where freedom and connection can live together. Silence and cut-offs confirm their belief that intimacy equals abandonment. For a dismissive avoidant, this belief is already deeply rooted. They grew up learning that people were unreliable. They learned that if they let someone close, that closeness could vanish without warning. So when silence appears, it doesn't feel like a surprise. It feels like proof. Proof that people always leave. Proof that trusting someone only leads to pain. That's why no contact or sudden cut-offs do not create longing for them. They do not sit in the silence imagining your return with hope. Instead, they sit in the silence and tell themselves they were right all along. They say, "See, this is why I don't get too close. This is why I protect myself. This is why I only depend on me." The silence does not make them want you more. It makes them want to protect themselves even harder. It pushes them further into the belief that intimacy is dangerous, that love cannot be trusted. What hurts even more is that in their mind, abandonment and closeness are tied together. The moment they allow closeness, the fear of loss grows. So when you disappear, it connects the two permanently. They think, every time I get close, I get left. And that's why silence becomes confirmation, not correction. Instead of shaking them awake, it hardens their walls. Instead of making them chase, it makes them withdraw. This is not because they don't care. It's because their defenses are stronger than their desires. Their survival strategy tells them that connection equals pain, and your cut-off feels like the very pain they've been preparing for their whole life. So the cycle repeats. They avoid intimacy to protect themselves. Someone confirms that avoidance by walking away in silence, and the belief grows even stronger. It's a heartbreaking loop because deep inside, they still crave connection, but the way it plays out convinces them to run from the very thing they long for. Silence and cut-offs don't break their defenses, they strengthen them. They feed the story that love is unsafe, that closeness is dangerous, that distance is the only real protection. And once that story takes hold, it becomes harder for them to see intimacy as anything other than abandonment waiting to happen. They are comfortable in distance, so no contact feels natural, not painful. What feels unbearable to you feels safe to them. Silence that eats you alive gives them relief. The space that feels like rejection in your heart feels like freedom in theirs. Distance is not a punishment to a dismissive avoidant. It is their refuge. It is the place where they can breathe, where no one is demanding, no one is asking, and no one is expecting more than they are ready to give. That's why no contact doesn't sting the way you imagine. For you, silence means loss. For them, silence means comfort. It matches the emotional environment they have always known. They grew up surviving with self-reliance, often soothing themselves without consistent care from others. So, distance feels like home. It feels normal even when it is empty. The quiet doesn't echo as loneliness for them the way it does for you. It echoes as safety. This is where the misunderstanding lies. You believe silence will create desire, but they believe silence is stability. You expect absence to make the heart grow fonder, but absence makes their defenses stronger. Instead of missing you, they slip deeper into their comfort zone. That comfort zone is solitude. It's the one place where they never risk being smothered, never risk being judged, never risk being abandoned, because no one is close enough to hurt them. So when you go no contact, they don't interpret it as love lost. They interpret it as life returning to its usual state. This is why they can stay distant for so long without breaking. It's not that they feel nothing. It's that distance is easier to manage than closeness. They don't panic in silence, they adapt to it, even thrive in it, because it demands nothing from them. And so, no contact doesn't ignite longing, it dulls it. It doesn't spark curiosity, it feeds detachment. While you may wait for them to realize your absence, they may use that absence as confirmation that they were right to rely only on themselves. They may even feel lighter without the weight of emotional closeness pressing on them. This is why no contact is not the trigger you think it is. Because for someone who feels safest in distance, your silence is not an interruption. It's an invitation back to the place they feel most in control. And in that silence, they don't ache the way you do. They rest in it, they settle into it, because for them, distance is not painful, distance is familiar, and familiarity always feels safe. Instead of drawing them closer, no contact validates their avoidance. It tells them their strategy works. It tells them keeping distance is the safest choice. It tells them intimacy will always end in disappointment. When you disappear without a word, they don't chase after you with fear of losing you. They lean back into the comfort of their walls. They remind themselves why they built those walls in the first place. And your silence becomes the proof they were looking for. They think, this is why I don't get too close. This is why I can't let anyone in, because the moment I do, they leave. They always leave. Instead of missing your presence, they justify your absence. Instead of longing for closeness, they double down on independence. No contact convinces them that avoidance is not just necessary, but smart. It's important to understand avoidance is their survival mechanism. It's not a game, not a choice they casually make. It's the shield they've carried for years, and when you go silent, you tell them your shield was right. That message hardens them. It doesn't melt their defenses, it reinforces them. It doesn't soften their stance, it strengthens their resolve. You might think silence will make them reconsider, but instead, it makes them commit. Commit to the belief that closeness equals pain. Commit to the belief that people are not safe. Commit to the belief that distance is the only answer. So while you wait for them to return, they wait for the proof of their story to settle deeper into their bones. And every passing day without contact feels like confirmation. For them, no contact is not a loss. It is validation. It tells them that pushing people away works. It tells them that detachment protects. It tells them that they were wise to trust no one but themselves. And the saddest part is this: deep down they do crave connection, but your silence convinces them that craving will always be punished, so they bury it further. They convince themselves they don't need what they secretly want. This is why avoidance grows stronger in silence, because silence doesn't threaten their defenses. It proves their defenses are necessary, and the more it feels necessary, the more impossible closeness seems. So, instead of opening their heart, no contact locks it tighter. Instead of making them move toward you, it makes them run further away. Instead of teaching them the value of intimacy, it teaches them the safety of avoidance. And for someone who already fears closeness, that lesson is the one they cling to most. So if you truly want to break the cycle, understand this: distance alone won't create connection. Avoidance isn't healed by silence, it's healed by safety. It's not about cutting them off, it's about showing them that closeness can exist without pressure, without control, and without fear. The goal is not to punish them into change, but to create an environment where trust can grow, where independence is respected, but intimacy is still possible, where love doesn't feel like a trap, but like freedom shared between two people. Because in the end, avoidance is not a lack of desire for love. It's a fear of losing themselves in it, and the only way to ease that fear is not through absence, but through presence, calm, steady, and unthreatening. That's how walls begin to soften. That's how distance loses its grip. That's how intimacy finally stops feeling like abandonment and starts feeling like home.